As of now, 2025, there are 9 countries in our world that have nuclear weapons. These include Russia, China, France, the UK, Pakistan, North Korea, India, and of course the United States. While it's a good way to show power and terror, if there is something you really don't want to mess up, it's nuclear tests. But sadly, they have gone south. And when they do, it's not just chaos, it's real-world fallout, fast. These are the 15 nuclear tests that went horribly wrong. Number 15. The Bainbury Incident. Well, the name says it all. Incident isn't used unless something went seriously off the rails. In December 1970, the U.S. conducted an underground nuclear test at the Nevada test site. The 10-kiloton bomb was placed 270 meters underground, and the assumption was out of sight, out of harm's way. But these guys were wrong. After the detonation, a crack in the ground let loose a huge radioactive cloud, launching it into the atmosphere and spreading it across many states. It didn't just float harmlessly away, it landed on nearby communities. Government officials claimed everything was fine. But just a few years later, several test site workers were dead from cancer. Fallout doesn't lie. This wasn't some isolated lab mistake. It exposed just how unpredictable nuclear tests can be. After Bainbury, testing was paused for 6 months, and even that felt like a band-aid. What's worse is that the US wouldn't officially stop testing for another 20 years. All from one incident that blew open the risks everyone pretended didn't exist. Number 14. The Demon Core. This is the most famous one, and we're sure everyone is familiar with this. The Demon Core wasn't a bomb dropped on a city or detonated in a desert. It was a 6.2 kilogram sphere of plutonium sitting in a lab. Originally made as a third strike option during World War II, it never got deployed, but it still caused death twice. In August 1945, a scientist was running a test when the core briefly went critical. A flash of blue light filled the room. 9 days later, he was dead from radiation. Less than a year later, another physicist made the same mistake. He used a screwdriver to separate the core from a neutron reflector. The tool slipped. The core went critical again. He saved the people in the room by pulling it apart, but it cost him his life. Both incidents happened at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and neither involved explosions, just raw, invisible radiation. That's why it got its name. It never saw combat, but it still took lives, not with fire, with silence. Number 13. Tsar Bomba. Nothing ever built before or since has matched the destructive scale of the Tsar Bomba in the whole history of humankind. Dropped on October 30th, 1961, over Novaya Zemlya, it carried a yield of 50 megatons. That's the power of 3,800 Hiroshima bombs combined. The shockwave shattered windows over 500 miles away. Seismic instruments around the world picked it up. And this wasn't even the full version. Originally designed to be 100 megatons, the Soviets scaled it down because they were genuinely worried it might crack the atmosphere. The mushroom cloud reached the stratosphere. The fireball alone stretched for miles. This wasn't just a flex of military muscle, it was a scientific wake-up call. The people who built it admitted afterward that it went too far. One of the physicists involved later spent his life campaigning against nuclear weapons. Tsar Bomba wasn't about victory, it was about limits, and the terrifying realization that humans had crossed a line where there was no turning back. Every single day we pray that World War III will not happen. Number 12. Castle Bravo. On March 1, 1954, the US set off its most potent nuclear device at Bikini Atoll, a thermonuclear bomb called Castle Bravo. The plan was to test a 6-megaton explosion, but what actually happened was 15 megatons, more than double what scientists expected. This wasn't just a miscalculation, it was one of the worst radiation accidents in US history. The blast vaporized coral, turned sand into glass, and flung radioactive ash across the Pacific. Residents of nearby atolls were exposed without warning. Even a Japanese fishing boat, the Lucky Dragon No. 5, was hit by fallout. Crew members suffered radiation sickness, and one died. The US government scrambled to manage the aftermath but couldn't undo the damage. Bikini Atoll was rendered uninhabitable, and still is. The misfire wasn't just a technical failure, it proved how unpredictable and destructive these weapons really are, even in controlled environments. Now imagine the potential for harm if a similar incident were to occur in a populated area. Well, it will be super bad. Number 11. Trinity. Before Hiroshima, before Nagasaki, the world's first ever nuclear detonation took place in New Mexico's Jornada del Muerto desert on July 16, 1945. The operation was called Trinity, and it marked the first time humans split the atom in a weaponized form. The device, nicknamed the Gadget, released a blast equivalent to 21 kilotons of TNT, creating a crater nearly 350 meters wide. Witnesses described a light brighter than the sun, followed by a shock wave that rippled for miles. The sand turned to glass. The sky turned strange. Scientists cheered, but not all of them. Some stood silent, horrified by what they'd created. This test wasn't meant to destroy anything specific. It was a proof of concept, a final confirmation that the Manhattan Project's years of research had produced something real. Trinity didn't just change warfare, it changed everything. In one instant, the future became heavier, quieter, more dangerous. A new kind of power had arrived, and no one truly knew what came next. All right, guys, now let's talk about number 10, standing under a nuke. It sounds crazy, but yes, people actually did this. In 1957, 5 U.S. Air Force officers and 1 cameraman stood directly beneath a 10,000-foot-high nuclear explosion in Nevada. The plan? Prove that airbursts were safe. No suits, no helmets. Just men in military uniforms watching a nuke go off above their heads. And no, the cameraman wasn't a volunteer. The flash nearly blinded them. The sound? Deafening. But the worst part was what came after, radiation raining down on their unprotected bodies. Every one of them eventually developed cancer. Some lived long lives. Others weren't as lucky, but the point of the test wasn't safety. It was showmanship. A PR stunt to calm the public and market nukes as clean, precise tools. Standing under a live nuclear bomb blast is probably the most reckless form of myth-busting ever recorded. And for what? To prove humans could survive it. They didn't die that day, but they absolutely paid for it. Number 9. Nunoxa radiation accident. In 2019, an explosion rocked a military test site near Nunoxa, a village on Russia's northern coast. The blast wasn't some ordinary weapons failure. It involved a nuclear-powered cruise missile, part of a top-secret program Putin had been developing. Official reports downplayed everything, saying it was just an isotope power source malfunction. But that didn't explain the column of water seen rising hundreds of feet, or the sudden surge in radiation levels. Locals, mostly fishermen, saw more than they were supposed to. One described a massive hole in a ship docked at the scene. Others reported being rushed to hospitals without answers. Several scientists and military staff were killed. Some died days later from radiation exposure. What made this worse wasn't just the explosion, it was the lack of transparency. Russia's silence only deepened suspicion. The accident revealed just how dangerous experimental tech can be when no one's held accountable. Nunoxa isn't just a warning, it's a cold reminder that secrets can still kill. Number 8. RDS-1. The Soviet Union's first successful nuclear test, RDS-1, happened on August 29, 1949. The bomb was detonated in Semipalatinsk, a remote region of Kazakhstan. For the Soviets, this wasn't just a show of force, it was a strategic necessity. After watching the US drop atomic bombs on Japan, the Kremlin accelerated its own weapons program, and they weren't experimenting blind. Soviet scientists had obtained classified Manhattan Project information through espionage. RDS-1 was nearly a clone of the US Fat Man bomb, and it worked. The detonation was kept secret at first, but US scientists quickly picked up traces of radioactive isotopes in the atmosphere. News spread fast. The Cold War had officially gone nuclear. In addition to proving the weapon's power, the Soviets also used over 1,500 animals to study radiation effects. RDS-1 marked the beginning of the arms race, a point where nuclear power stopped being exclusive. One bomb, one test site, and suddenly the whole world was standing on a tighter wire. Number 7. Operation Red Wing. Now, this is just super insane and terrifying. Between May and July of 1956, the US carried out 17 nuclear detonations under the umbrella of Operation Red Wing. This wasn't just about expanding the arsenal, it was about refining the second generation of nuclear weapons. Tests were held at Bikini and Inuitak atolls in the Pacific, where heat, pressure, and fallout were studied under extreme conditions. One of the more infamous tests, Red Wing Cherokee, marked the first airdropped hydrogen bomb by a US aircraft. The operation pushed yield boundaries higher while testing design reliability, triggering concern among scientists and allies alike. While the US government claimed the fallout was contained, radioactive contamination affected service members, island residents, and even monitoring ships. Red Wing wasn't the first test to spread fallout across international borders, but it added to a pattern that was becoming hard to ignore. By the end of it, the results helped shape the future of US nuclear deterrence, but at the cost of real human exposure. Numbers climbed. So did doubts. What do you think about it? Number 6. Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. March 11, 2011. A massive 9.0 magnitude earthquake struck off the coast of Japan, triggering a tsunami that devastated communities and overwhelmed the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The reactors shut down as planned, but the tsunami wiped out the backup generators responsible for cooling them. What followed wasn't instant. It unfolded over hours. Systems failed. Pressure built. Hydrogen explosions tore through reactor buildings. By the end, 3 reactor cores melted down, releasing radioactive material into the air and ocean. Over 150,000 people were evacuated, and entire towns were abandoned. Unlike Chernobyl, this wasn't caused by human negligence during testing, it was nature meeting a system unprepared for nature's scale. Yet the aftermath was just as devastating. Cleanup continues to this day. Wastewater, contaminated soil, and exposed workers are all part of an ongoing crisis. Fukushima showed that even without war, nuclear power carries a risk that never really fades. Technology might be precise, but the world around it isn't. Number 6. Starfish Prime. In July 1962, the US decided to see what would happen if you blew up a nuclear bomb in space. And the result of that experiment was the Starfish Prime, a high-altitude nuclear test that detonated a bomb 400 kilometers above Earth, basically in low Earth orbit. No people were killed, but the effects were wild. The explosion created a massive electromagnetic pulse, in short, EMP, that hit Hawaii, knocking out hundreds of streetlights, setting off alarms, and messing with communications across the islands, 800 miles away. This wasn't an accident. It was just a misunderstanding of what nuclear energy does when it goes off in space. The EMP was way more powerful than expected, and it proved how vulnerable modern infrastructure is to even a single high-altitude detonation. You can't see radiation or pulses, but they can wreck entire systems. Starfish Prime didn't flatten buildings or leave a crater, but it exposed something even scarier: how unprepared we are for silent, invisible fallout that rides the airwaves. Number 4. Chernobyl. Well, no list of horrible nuclear tests gone wrong can be complete without it. The meltdown at Chernobyl wasn't triggered by war or weapons, it came from a test that went completely sideways inside a nuclear power plant. On April 26, 1986, operators at Reactor 4 ran a turbine safety experiment, unaware they were stacking every condition for a disaster. Power dropped unexpectedly. They tried to force the reactor back up, overriding key safety systems. The RBMK reactor design had a critical flaw that made low-power operation dangerous, a detail not fully known to the operators. Within moments, control rods jammed, pressure built, and the reactor exploded. Flames, steam, and radiation tore through the building. Entire towns like Pripyat had to be evacuated. Dozens died from acute exposure, while thousands more developed long-term health effects. Chernobyl still stands as a toxic monument, locked inside a steel sarcophagus. Its exclusion zone stretches for miles. While wildlife has returned, humans haven't, and maybe will never. Number 3. The Marshall Islands. These islands might sound like a remote tropical dream, but from 1946 onward, they became a hotspot for nuclear madness. The U.S. picked this Pacific chain as its go-to testing ground, dropping 67 nuclear bombs there, 23 of them on Bikini Atoll alone. In total, 65 official nuclear tests were carried out across the islands. Radiation? Off the charts. In fact, parts of Bikini Atoll still clock radiation levels 10 times higher than Chernobyl. You can actually spot the blown-out craters left behind under the water, massive, eerie scars from bombs that tore through the seabed. Technically, yes, a handful of people still live there. We're talking maybe 10 or so, but chilling on the beach is absolutely not. That's where radiation is strongest. It's the kind of place that reminds you nukes don't just vanish after they go boom, they linger decades later in the air, the soil, and the water. This wasn't just testing, it was long-term damage carved into paradise. Number 2. 1961 Goldsboro. The 52 crash. The town of Goldsboro came dangerously close to being wiped off the map in January 1961. A Boeing B-52 Stratofortress broke apart mid-air while carrying 2 nuclear bombs, each packing more destructive power than all the explosives used in World War II. One of them landed safely by parachute. The other hit the ground hard, straight into a muddy field. Officials were quick to calm the public, claiming neither bomb was armed. But that wasn't true. Later documents revealed both bombs were fully capable of detonating, and only one safety switch prevented disaster. If that switch had failed, the blast could have leveled large parts of North Carolina and caused devastating fallout. The crash didn't just expose a mechanical flaw, it showed how close the U.S. came to nuking its own soil, and all of it because of a malfunction at cruising altitude. Sometimes it's not war or enemies that get you, it's your own technology, misfiring above your own towns. Number 1. Lake Chagin. Back in 1965, the Soviet Union figured, why not use a nuclear bomb to dig a lake? Well, that wasn't a joke. It was an actual idea. They dropped a 140 kiloton bomb in Kazakhstan and called the operation Lake Chagin. Technically, it worked. The blast created a giant crater, water filled it, and boom, instant lake. But that lake? It's radioactive to this day. Nicknamed Atomic Lake, it's so contaminated that even standing near it too long is a bad idea. The Soviets didn't stop there. They actually considered this part of a broader project to use nuclear bombs for peaceful construction. But reality didn't agree. The fallout from Chagin spread much farther than expected, all the way to Japan, violating international test bans and stirring global outrage. Sure, it was creative. Drop a bomb, skip the shovels, but the consequences were real. Lake Chagin became a textbook example of what happens when nuclear tech is used like a shortcut instead of a last resort. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, and smack that subscribe button for more content like this. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.